is that thing? What is that? What are you?
Go to sleep. Go to sleep, you little prick. Go the fuck to s- What the fuck? How you doing? Today I'm going to be retelling you the entire story of Five Nights at Freddy's from start to finish. And no, this is not a game, this is not a joke, this is the entire story. There is no questions left unanswered, and if there is any questions that I may have perhaps missed, you can feel free to ask them in the comments and I will answer them to the best of my abilities. But this is the entire story of Five Nights at Freddy's from start to finish, from origins all the way to the end of Pizzeria Simulator Ultimate Custom Night. Now, I want to let you know two things, actually. First off, I will not be including Help Wanted, Special Delivery, and Security Breach in this timeline video. Mainly because that timeline continues on with a new story that's still going on to this day and is very convoluted, and I don't want to jump into that mess of shit. I'll let some of the big theorists like FNAF and MatPat do that shit. The second thing I want to tell you is that to understand some of the points in this video, you need to go watch my previous video, which is a theory called the cheating mother theory. The cheating mother theory is the very thing that has helped me solve the entire lore of Five Nights at Freddy's from start to finish, which I will be covering today. And if you have not watched that video, you need to stop this video and you need to go watch that video, because that video will give you all the information that you need to understand the points that I will be talking about in this video. Because I am not going to be re-saying everything from start to finish. I am going to be going from the story's beginning to the story's end without anything else in between. I'm not going to be showing you proof, evidence, or anything like that. I'm going to be telling this like if I was telling a story, and I will be displaying on screen to the best of my abilities all the story points and all the story keys, and then you can figure out how I came to those conclusions, or I'll be happy to tell you how I came to those conclusions in the comments. But anyway, let's get this shit poppin'. William Afton is a young scientist. He's also a young robotics engineer. He has a crazy goal in mind. He wants to figure out how human life, human spirit, can become immortal. The problem is that his efforts have been nothing but failures. In fact, it's actually led him to get defunded and fired.
But you can't do this to me. You know how much I sacrificed?
This, of course, would lead to Afton having to work the night shift at the Fry Me Taco.
You work the graveyard shift at the Fry Me Taco. Don't lie to me!
Whilst working a basic 9 to 5, he would eventually meet his friend and partner in crime, or perhaps he would meet his friend before then, Henry Emily. The two would hit it off pretty quickly and would become best friends in no time flat, especially given their love for engineering. Although whilst one got inspiration to eventually create a business and a restaurant of his own to create animatronics to entertain children, the other was still focused on his science dreams, trapped in his little fantasy world. Soon they would meet a chick by the name of Clara, or whatever the fuck her name is going to be, and pretty easily William Afton and Clara would hit it off. In no time flat, they were in a relationship. Unfortunately, it wasn't long until they would have a baby as well, which was something that William Afton was not prepared for, let alone wanted. He would try everything that he could to avoid paying child custody for a kid that he did not want.
I can't be a father.
Well, then at least pay your child support, you deadbeat!
Although after they got back together, they would have another kid. The problem was that William Afton was not a family man. He was not good at taking care of children, let alone having two now, and it was clear through his neglection. His little boy and his little girl were nothing but payment to him, something that he had to pay, rather than somebody that he actually could care and love for. This, of course, would be clear and evident through Clara, who wanted to have a family, who wanted to have a proper father figure, but William Afton could never fulfill the fantasy of being a family man. But somebody else could, Henry Emily. In fact, that's all he wanted to do, was to entertain children, was to please and make them happy, give them their happiest days. So right when William Afton and Henry Emily would finally get the chance to create and build their own empire, their own business, within Fredbear's Family Diner, Clara decided to change men. She would get with Henry, and soon they would hit it off and have two children of their own. Upon figuring out that his girlfriend has slept with his best friend, it has made him resentful, bitter, angry. It has given him the agony and the pain to deal with that he now portrays onto his young little boy, Michael, with all of the problems that he has and putting it onto him. This, of course, would lead Michael to have to find somebody else to comfort him. That wouldn't be a problem for Michael, as he was a little boy after all, and he would find friends pretty easily. 3 boys in particular: Gabriel, Jeremy, and Fritz. The 4 of them would hit it off and become great best friends for a long time to come. And whenever Michael had a problem with his father, he would have no problem going to hang out with his boys. For William, however, the obsession over wanting to get back at Clara and to get back at Henry started to drive him to insanity. Upon realizing that Clara wanted Elizabeth and Michael to be stripped away from him, William Afton devised a plan. A plan that would ultimately lead him to not only have custody over Michael and Elizabeth to spite Clara, but would also lead him to have custody over Sammy and Charlie. He wanted to display that Henry and Clara were not suitable parents, so he could take away the one thing that means the most to them: their 2 twin children, Charlie and Sammy. Afton would devise various plans, various schemes onto how he could possibly manage to convince the authorities that he is a better and more suitable parent. And then he devised a plan. He wanted to stage a kidnapping. But how was he going to do that? He didn't exactly have any easy means of doing so, and so he started to do what he does best: create animatronics. He began to create 3 animatronics in particular: Ballora, Funtime Freddy, and Funtime Foxy, all designed specifically to lure Sammy and Charlie out of their household and bring them back to him. At first, Afton didn't want to kill the kids. Afton just wanted to get the kids in his hands, which is why he specifically designed Funtime Freddy to capture the kid rather than kill the kid and bring them back to him, which is also why he designed them to have voice changers, to perhaps disguise their voices to Henry, or perhaps even Clara. However, the animatronics weren't properly designed, and each time they would try, they would fail in doing their mission. The unfortunate part about this is that Afton wasted years to try and do this, and Afton has yet to make any improvements to winning this child custody battle. In fact, he's closer to losing than ever. But now Afton had to devise another plan. Rather than waiting for his animatronics to do the job for him, he would do the job himself. One day, whilst playing in the back rooms, Afton would dress up in his spring Bonnie costume and would kidnap one of the 2 kids. He would bring Sammy back home. There, of course, he would stage the whole thing to make it seem like Sammy ran away rather than got kidnapped, and that Sammy ran away because he didn't trust his father. He was afraid of his father. But this lie had no evidence to back it, and so now William Afton had to find a way and figured out a way how to back this claim, whilst also not revealing himself to be the kidnapper. Unfortunately, Sammy would not budge, and every time when William Afton left to go work, Sammy would run away from home. He'd run back to the restaurant that he knew his father worked at, constantly going back there each and every single night, escaping from William Afton's grasp. This, of course, only agitated William Afton. With the frustrations and the thought of losing what left did Afton have, he would constantly go visit the bar, Junior's, to drink his sorrows away. But each time he'd go visit there, he'd come home worse. One night, in a drunken state, he'd run over a dog. The dog belonged to a little girl by the name of Susie. To avoid being caught, he would take the dog with him, bury it in the cemetery, where nobody could find it. Now frustrated, William Afton had nothing left to do but one evil little plot to put this whole thing into motion. If he couldn't convince the authorities that Henry and Clara were not suitable parents because they neglected their children, then perhaps he could convince the authorities that Henry was a murderer and neglected his children. With such a plan like that, William had to figure out how to execute it. Henry was not taking any more chances. He created a puppet, a marionette specifically designed to protect Charlie from meeting the same fate that Sammy met, from being kidnapped. And William Afton knew this, so how was he going to do this? Well, he had to isolate Charlie. But luckily for him, he didn't have to do anything to isolate Charlie, as some brats inside the Fredbear family diner would do it for him, bullying Charlie, locking her outside, and of course, preventing the puppet from saving her. After William Afton drove up on Charlie and killed her, he would throw her body in the back alleyway, where upon leaving, the security puppet would go out to find her, breaking down from the rain right next to her, where Charlie's spirit would fuse with the marionette puppet, unknowing to William Afton at the time. Going home, William Afton was excited. His plan was finally going to work. He killed Charlie in such an unexpected way, whilst Henry was too busy serving tables wearing the Fredbear costume. William Afton was ready to go celebrate at Junior's with another beer.
1 beer, 2 beers, 3 beers, a shot of whiskey, a margarita, and a Bloody Mary.
Unfortunately, the place was closed, so either that or they didn't want him. I don't exactly remember, but one of the two. And so William Afton would have to go home instead. He would visit the grave where he buried the dog. Nobody found it nor dug it up, so that was luckily on him. Upon going home, Michael was doing the usual, glued to the TV screen, watching soap operas. However, upon going to Sammy's room, he'd find that Sammy once again ran away, back to Fredbear's family diner. But this time, Afton knew exactly what that kid was going to see. When Sammy ran back to Fredbear's family diner, he would most likely find a horrific scene. Henry would have probably realized by now that Charlie would have been missing, and while still in his Fredbear outfit, he'd go outside to search for both the puppet and Charlie, find her dead body next to the puppet. It is then Sammy would show up and see the scene. Fredbear standing over his dead sister. This of course would traumatize Sammy, and this narrative would of course be the one narrative that William Afton would rely on to win the custody battle, once and for all. In court, with the evidence against Henry, William Afton would convince Sammy by telling him to remember what he saw that night. And Sammy would go to the stand and say exactly what he saw. Fredbear, his father, Henry, in the Fredbear suit, standing over his dead sister. And that, of course, would be enough to prove that William Afton was more suitable and gain custody over Sammy. Upon gaining custody, William Afton would change Sammy's name to Evan Afton. As for the Emily family, they would fall apart. Henry, of course, would now have to deal with a bunch of charges against him, whilst Clara would take her own life. Afton, however, celebrated in his victory. He created a new brand of Fazbear Entertainment, Fredbear and Friends. He would use Henry's newly created animatronics as the main attractions, alongside the classic suits of Fredbear and Spring Bonnie. Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy. It was so successful that Afton created his own spin-off brand as well. He called it the Sister Location, as its name was Circus Baby's Pizza World, and would be the sister location to Fredbear and Friends. This new place would be all for his daughter, Elizabeth Afton. He would utilize his old animatronics, specifically designed for kidnapping, as the animatronics for the place, without realizing the dangers that it posed if they were to malfunction. In poetic justice, Elizabeth Afton would be killed under Afton's watch, as she went to go and play with the dangerous Circus Baby, which was originally Henry's creation before William Afton took it over. He would find herself trapped and killed. Upon the death of his daughter, William Afton had a lot of work to do, because now CPS was on his ass. He too was not eligible for raising children. But before that would happen, William Afton would make a revolutionary discovery, one with Elizabeth Afton. It turned out that Elizabeth wasn't dead. In fact, she was still alive in some capacity. Her spirit was now possessing Circus Baby, and upon realizing and figuring this out, Afton would waste no time in trying to continue experimentations and see if his lifelong dream of immortality could become true, could become real. Was it actually possible? He would dig up the dead dog from the cemetery and begin experimenting with animatronic parts. Of course, nothing exactly extreme would happen at first, but he'd hope that maybe the dog could possess the animatronics, and maybe he could prove in some capacity that this is exactly what happens. Whilst Afton focused on that, Sammy, now known as Evan's birthday was coming up. However, Evan dreaded it this time around. His sister was dead. His father, in his eyes, was a murderer, and his new brother was an asshole. Michael would project all of his insecurities onto young little Evan because of how his father treats him. He, Gabriel, Fritz, and Jeremy would all mess around with the little boy until the birthday came up. There, it was time. Time for Evan to have the best birthday ever. Evan would be brought up to Fredbear, give Fredbear a big kiss on the cheek. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. That would lead straight to Evan's death. The bite of 83. Not documented because it was believed to be a spring lock failure rather than an animatronic malfunction. Evan would be hospitalized and would soon die. William Afton would find out what happened through the animatronic that he was creating. Whilst placing around Fredbear radios to keep watch of Evan and to make sure that Evan never told the truth or figured it out, one of the radios he had stashed that he was using the parts for to build the Mangle, this new animatronic, would go off, and there he would hear the report. Now it wasn't going to be long until Michael was going to be taken away from Afton. Afton now had 2 kids dead under his watch, and Michael needed a new family soon. William Afton didn't waste time with his experiments. In fact, the crying child was going to be his very first experiment. If it worked for Circus Baby, if it worked for Elizabeth, then it should work for the crying child. Funtime Freddy was the perfect animatronic to do so too. He would eject this remnant that seemed to be the soul juice and the key to everything. And just like that, he would indeed put the crying child back together, as it now possessed the Funtime Freddy animatronic. As for Michael, this was much more impactful for him. He felt responsible for his brother's death. And William Afton, best believe he didn't let him hear the end of it. In fact, William Afton took this as a perfect opportunity to torture Michael. Using his newly created illusion discs that allowed for animatronic parts to be viewed as real animals, real fantasy creatures, he would utilize on Michael every time he'd go to sleep. These illusion discs would give off the false alert that Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, Fredbear were all monsters that wanted to kill Michael. And of course, William Afton would sit back and watch from his monitor all the way down there in the basement of his storage unit for the animatronics. The storage unit was for the Circus Baby's Pizza World. It's where they had to move the animatronics once they had to close the restaurant before it even opened. Michael would be tormented for days, but luckily CPS would finally take action, and finally Michael was out of William Afton's hair. Michael was adopted into the Schmidt family, where you'd find a much more comforting family, whilst also being able to hang out with his friends who were also supportive of him. However, for Afton, this was far from the end of tormenting Michael. In fact, it was only the beginning. With the closing of Fredbear and Friends, a new establishment arose with a new face of the company. Freddy Fazbear's Pizza was created and built, and it became the most popular restaurant in the entire world. Every child loved Freddy's. Every child loved Freddy Fazbear. Every child loved Bonnie. Every child loved Chica. And especially, every child loved Foxy. Michael loved Foxy too. Foxy was always his favorite, as is most people's. And that's why he was always trying to get the special Foxy ticket to go see Foxy's show. Him and his friends would always try to go into the air blower to see if they can get that ticket, but they would always fail. But Michael was still determined. All the while, William Afton was scheming. No longer was this man sane. This man was at the brink of insanity. He had lost everything that he built, and now he had a science experiment to fulfill. He couldn't be the family man. He couldn't fulfill his parenthood, but he could also create his own family. His own friends of fun, lovable animals. Kids who would want their fantasies to be fulfilled. He would fulfill it for them. It was easy, after all. All he had to do was kill them, stuff them in the suits, and then they were reborn. His first two victims were at a birthday party. It was young Cassidy's birthday. Cassidy was being gifted by the marionette. All the while, Susie was playing a little arcade game. Susie had lost her dog prior, and Afton knew it was Susie whose dog it was. And so, Afton used it to his advantage. He lured Susie to the back, and then soon he would lure the birthday girl to the back. He'd slaughter Susie, and after slaughtering Susie, he would trap Cassidy inside one of the Springlot suits and display in full effect as he pulled the plug, and the Springlots would activate, killing Cassidy effectively. When the two kids disappeared without trace, police immediately arrested Afton, assuming that he was the suspect, but of course, they didn't have any evidence other than the thought that he used his mascot costume to lure the kids to the back room. But again, there was no proof that he was the man behind the mask, the man behind the slaughter, perhaps. But at the same time, everybody was confident that it was him. As a matter of fact, William Afton would strike again, not too long after that. Mike and his friends would finally be able to get another chance at winning that Foxy ticket. Upon entering, Mike was ready to get the ticket, but his friends noticed something. A rabbit, a yellow rabbit. And when his friends saw it, they immediately tried to follow him to see what he was up to. Unfortunately, they would never come back, as it was a trap. It's exactly what he wanted. And when Michael exited and he was ready to go to the Foxy show, his friends were gone, and thus the show would start without him. He would go searching for his friends, only to find the horrific truth. His father killed them, and now he was being forced to stuff them into the suits. When everybody exited the building, Michael and William would clean up the place. When it was all over, Michael went home. When police asked Michael, Michael was too afraid to reveal where they hid the bodies, and so he kept quiet. Fortunately for him, though, William Afton would get fined and charged, and they were on his trail. Michael would not have to deal with him for a long time to come from there. As for Fazbear Entertainment, soon the animatronics started to get smelly, disgusting. Something was clearly wrong about them. Something from perhaps within that was showing on the exterior. But again, what else was there? By the end of the year, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza would be closed. Although a manager from Fredbear and Friends would step up to the plate and take the new manager role whilst Afton was dealing with criminal charges. This new manager would create a new Freddy Fazbear's Pizza based off of some of Afton's created robotics that were supposed to be more kid-friendly adaptations and versions of Freddy and the gang. Although it started to become very clear that these new updated models of animatronics were just as dangerous more specifically though to adults. A fresh new young security guard, also conveniently named Jeremy Fitzgerald, would be tasked with a job, a night guard job. He saw it as easy payment, although the previous night guard was suffering through some traumatic experiences, and Jeremy would soon figure out why. The marionette, which was brought back for this establishment, although not exactly very pleased to be, was the key to this all. The marionette had efficiently brought back to life the previous 5 animatronics, and now Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, whilst deactivated and broken down in the back room, would come back to life that very night and try to kill Jeremy, assuming that he may be their potential killer. As for the toy animatronics, they would do the same, and soon Jeremy would have to be tasked with dealing with 10 to 11 different animatronics each night. The traumatized Jeremy would soon be relieved when the place was starting to close down. But Jeremy was determined to figure out more, to find more, to understand what was going on. But things only got worse, because now one of the suits was missing, a golden suit. The place would go under investigation, as it appeared that William Afton was not done. Whilst that happened, Jeremy went back for another night. After Jeremy completed his night shift and be moved to the day shift for only a singular day, one birthday party, an incident happened during the day shift. The former night guard would meet a terrible fate, as the Mangle, the very creature that William Afton had been trying to create based off the dog's spirit possessing the animatronic, would climb to the ceiling and bite into his frontal lobe. However, the night guard managed to survive, miraculously, but of course was extremely injured and would never be able to recover from such an incident. Following the incident, another night guard would take the spot, take the place, although this time it was William Afton, using one of the dead kids' names, Fritz, to get into the restaurant. He had a plan to devise. He had to get to the animatronic. Specifically, he had to get to the marionette. William Afton had been creating a new animatronic, one known as Lefty, specifically designed to capture the marionette. And this is exactly what he was here to do. He was here to take care of the marionette once and for all by having it encased and trapped inside an animatronic suit. As for the restaurant in and of itself, the phone guy, aka the new manager, would try to figure out how to get Fazbear's back and running. Try to call up Henry. Unfortunately, he'd find out that Henry would kill himself upon hearing about the events that took place at his restaurant. And so, he had to rebuild the place on his own. A new Freddy Fazbear's Pizza was created. Although this time, nobody showed up. Nobody turned up. Nobody was there. Everybody was traumatized by the events of Freddy Fazbear's. Nobody trusted him. It wasn't safe. Things would go dormant for a long time following this. William Afton would soon be effectively arrested for good this time. Even with the killer behind bars, charges would not last long, as he would get out 5 years later on good behavior. Whilst working the night shift himself, the manager would find his unfortunate end on night 4, when he got surrounded by the animatronics, before being effectively killed. However, somebody else took the manager role. Somebody posed as the phone guy, pretending to be him, and would offer up a night shift job. Of course, guess who would take the job? Mike Schmidt, formerly known as Michael Afton, now grown up, was ready to put his friends to rest once and for all. He knew where his friends were, but he didn't know what he was going to do. And thus, the classic Five Nights at Freddy's begins. Mike Schmidt would work his night shift for 5 nights, but each time doing so, he would fail to try and save his friends, let alone convince his friends that he was their friend. Upon figuring out that the manager, aka the phone guy, was dead, Mike would realize that somebody else was posing as him then. And that's when he would discover that it was William Afton, his father. Upon figuring that out, William would cut a deal with his son. The deal was simple. William will save his friends, free their spirits from their animatronic prisons, but Michael would have to do the same to Elizabeth. Michael, of course, would agree to this terms, as long as his friends got to finally rest in peace. Unfortunately, both Aftons would find themselves in an unfortunate circumstance, as they would not make it out of this alive. Well, still human anyway. Michael Afton would go to the storage unit under the ground and effectively be tricked by Circus Baby into getting scooped, where the animatronics would fuse together and use his corpse as an entity and a means of escaping that establishment. However, the two conflicting souls of Evan and Elizabeth would go at each other, causing there to be a split. However, since Michael was also technically possessing the animatronic being, his spirit remained within his own body, and now he was a prisoner to his own dead corpse. All the while, Elizabeth, aka Circus Baby, would rebuild. The same going for Evan, rebuilding himself into a molten blob known as Molten Freddy. William Afton, on the other hand, while he was trying to destroy the animatronics, he would successfully do so, but then he would be haunted by the spirits as they've been released from their prisons. The hauntings would effectively spook him into hiding in his animatronic suit before it would activate, killing him in the spring locks in the very same way that he killed Cassidy. With both Aftons dead, and with the establishment now officially being closed off, it seemed that Freddy Fazbear's was gone forever. However, it would come back. A horror attraction was planned to be created for Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. It was based on the dark mysteries, rumors, and origins of the place. A couple of bros wanted to make a great, scary attraction, and of course they needed somebody with past experience to, of course, tell the spooky tales of what happened there, and inform his own personal experience. And that is where Jeremy Fitzgerald comes in. After many years of being away from the Fazbear Entertainment name, Jeremy would come back, feeling the need to inform people about the devastation and the dark truth of what Fazbear's Entertainment was. He would take the night shift, of course, and he would be like the security guard at the end of the place and be like, hey, you know what happened here? It's pretty spooky. I'll tell you all about it. And he'll tell these past experiences. What Jeremy was not prepared for, however, was that they found a real animatronic. The animatronic, of course, that they found was none other than Springtrap. They placed it in there with Jeremy, and Jeremy's PTSD would trigger. He would begin to hallucinate the very night and the very animatronics that he saw. It would all come flooding back to him. And with all these hallucinations, it would cause him to go crazy. Jeremy decided that it was time to end this, and so he decided to burn the place to the ground. Fazbear's Fright was not going to live on, and he was going to burn Springtrap once and for all. Now you could take this as any way you want. Jeremy could either survive the attack and then reappear as the same technician in FNAF VR Help Wanted, or if you don't count Help Wanted and you don't count that storyline, then Jeremy could die in the fire, effectively, well, failing because Springtrap survived. While burned and fucked up, Springtrap would effectively be able to recreate himself using some of the old suits that he'd find, although he would look even worse than he did before, and I do mean that figuratively. However, the story was still not over. With William Afton still alive and kicking, one man was going to bring it to the end.
Father, it's me, Michael.
It turns out that Henry faked his death because he had one giant plan. One plan to lead all the animatronics back and burn it to the ground for good this time. And so, he would get a volunteer to effectively bring back all the still living souls in the animatronics. Molten Freddy with Evan's spirit, Circus Baby with Elizabeth's spirit, Lefty containing Marionette containing Charlie's spirit, and of course Springtrap, Afton's spirit. But of course there was one other person too, Michael Afton, who had been hiding in the shadows for years and now had to try and find his father again. Upon seeing the volunteer opportunity, he took it. And thus the family was once again reunited. As Michael brought in all the animatronics, he would keep them in the maze, where Henry would finally be able to execute his plan, killing everybody, including himself. Nobody made it out alive, and all the animatronics would be burnt to a crisp, and that would be the end of Five Nights at Freddy's. And in hell, William Afton would be tormented forever by the very things that he created, and by the very spirit that he screwed over all those years ago. Cassidy would never let him leave. Until, of course, Old Man Consequences convinces her otherwise and allows William Afton to rest once and for all, whichever ending you prefer. And there was never another Five Nights at Freddy's game after that. Oh, we wish. Yeah, but there's obviously FNAF Help Wanted and all that shit, and Afton gets brought back because of some circuit board shit and his spirit was still there. I don't fucking know. I don't fucking care at this point in time. But that is the end of Five Nights at Freddy's. That is the entire story of Five Nights at Freddy's. Start to finish, all questions answered. If there is any other questions, like I said, let me know in the comments, and I'll try to answer them the best I could. But this is it. I want to know what y'all think. I want to know what Matt Pat thinks. I want to know what everybody thinks. This is the ultimate Halloween video I had planned for a long time. And to that I say thank you for tuning in. Thank you for joining. And I hope you all have a good day. Arrivederci, bitch ass motherfuckers.